I always feel like I'm the best to ever play this game.
LeBron James calls himself the greatest of all time, and his biggest argument, longevity, consistency, and of course, being the NBA's all-time leading scorer.
That one right there made me the greatest player of all time.
But here's the thing, that record, the one that's supposed to cement his legacy, might look a whole lot different if we took away just one part of his game, the three-pointer. Because if LeBron never took a three, would he still be the scoring king? For decades, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar held that record without ever relying on the deep ball. He did it after spending 3 full years at UCLA, dominating college basketball and winning 3 straight national titles. Before LeBron, Kareem was the definition of longevity and consistency. A 6-time MVP, 5-time champion, 11-time all-defensive selection, 4-time blocks leader, and 2-time scoring champ. Karl Malone, 3 years in college, nearly 2 decades in the league, over 36,000 points, and barely any from distance, yet neither man was ever crowned the GOAT. Michael Jordan, 3 years in college, missed nearly an entire season with a broken foot, retired twice, and still finished top 5 on the NBA's all-time scoring list. So why does longevity and total points suddenly define greatness? Now that LeBron owns the record, that's why I decided to run this experiment, to level the playing field. Because when Wilt Chamberlain played, there was no three-point line, spacing didn't exist, it wasn't even a concept yet, and defenders basically had a license to commit assault in the paint. When Kareem took over, that line still didn't exist. When Michael Jordan entered the league, it was brand new, and taking them in volume was frowned upon. And remember, Jordan played in one of the most physical eras in basketball history. Hand-checking was legal, and fouls that would be called flagrant today were just considered good defense.
They're starting getting more into the flow of what they want to do offensively. And Jordan goes down hard.
By the time Kobe Bryant dominated, the pace of play had slowed to its lowest point in modern NBA history. So what happens when we strip it all back, remove the threes, adjust for pace, and account for the physicality of older eras? When we compare these legends on equal ground, who really comes out on top? Today, we're going to find out. No threes, no modern boosts, no era advantages, just pure buckets. And when we do, you might be surprised by who the real scoring king truly is. So here's how we're going to do it. We're taking LeBron, Kareem, Jordan, Kobe, and yes, even Karl Malone and Wilt, putting them on equal footing. No threes, adjusted for pace, adjusted for physicality. Basically, we're sending everyone back to the basketball Stone Age, and then we'll see who really comes out on top. Oh, and before we dive in, if you love weird basketball experiments like this, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Because if I'm out here manually removing every LeBron three-pointer just to find out if Kareem still wins, the least you can do is bless me with a click.
The NBA's all-time scoring record now belongs to LeBron James.
So before we start crunching numbers and erasing three-pointers from history, let's rewind to the moment that started this entire debate. February 7th, 2023. Los Angeles, California. LeBron James is 38 years old, 20 seasons deep, standing on the verge of basketball immortality. Third quarter, fadeaway jumper from the left elbow. Swish. And just like that, he passes Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, becoming the NBA's all-time leading scorer.
LeBron James, a shot in history. And there it is! LeBron stands alone!
It was a cinematic moment. The crowd on its feet, cameras flashing, Kareem himself sitting courtside, watching as his 4-decade record finally fell. The league called it the passing of the torch. ESPN ran the GOAT debates for weeks. LeBron didn't just break a record, he broke the record. But what most people missed that night is how different their paths really were. Kareem built his legacy in an era without spacing, without threes, without even thinking about launching from 25 feet out. His game was the skyhook, post-ups, and free throws, not step-backs and transition threes. LeBron? His journey looks nothing like that. From teenage phenom to playmaking powerhouse, to eventually a stretch four who could punish defenses from deep, he evolved with the times, thriving in a league built for offense. A league where hand-checking is gone, driving lanes are wide open, and teams play small, spreading the floor like never before. No bruisers waiting at the rim, no elite shot blockers patrolling the paint, and a pace that lets stars pile up points faster than ever. That evolution, adding the three-pointer and adapting to a softer, faster, more spaced-out game, became one of the biggest reasons he could outlast everyone. So yes, he broke Kareem's record, but the real question is, did he do it the same way? Because if we level the playing field, take away the threes, slow the pace, and rewind basketball back to its roots, that record might not stand for long. So, what happens when we take away every single one of LeBron's three-pointers? To find out, we're running the ultimate basketball experiment. Step 1, strip the game back to its core. Twos, free throws, and nothing else. Step 2, compare LeBron to the legends who came before him. Kareem, Jordan, Kobe, Karl Malone, and Wilt Chamberlain. Step 3, level the playing field, adjusting for pace, efficiency, and just how physical those older eras really were. Because here's the problem with raw numbers. They don't tell the whole story. Kareem scored nearly all his points inside the paint. Jordan dominated when hand-checking was legal and spacing barely existed. Wilt averaged 50 a night when teams played 130 possessions a game. And LeBron? He's played through the most offense-friendly era in NBA history. Faster pace, wider spacing, and rules that practically invite you to shoot threes. So if we erase that advantage, remove every point he's ever scored from deep, LeBron's total of 42,184 career points suddenly drops to around 39,625. Still incredible. Still top-tier longevity. But now Kareem's 38,387 isn't that far behind. The gap almost disappears. For context, look at how little the other legends change. Michael Jordan loses just 581 points, going from 32,292 to 31,711, a drop of less than 2%. Karl Malone, he barely moves, losing only 85 points out of nearly 37,000. That difference alone shows how much the three-pointer has reshaped modern scoring. LeBron's greatness is built partly on adaptation, evolving his game for a new era. But when you strip that era advantage away, the all-time scoring list starts to look a lot different. And that's when things get really interesting, because you can't just delete the threes and call it fair. You've also got to account for the era, the pace of play, the league's offensive efficiency, and the level of contact players faced night after night. Once you normalize for those factors, LeBron's scoring edge starts to shrink even more. Meanwhile, players like Jordan, Kobe, and Malone earned nearly every point the hard way through mid-range jumpers and post-ups. Wilt's crazy totals come back to earth once you adjust for pace. Kareem's efficiency holds up across generations. And Jordan, well, his numbers go from absurd to flat-out unfair. When you put everyone on equal ground, no threes, no modern boosts, no era advantages, the story of the NBA's scoring king looks very different. And once we crunch the final numbers, you might be surprised who really ends up on top. Before we reveal who really comes out on the top, we need to address one thing that most fans overlook: era context. Because the way basketball was played in 1965, 1995, and 2025 is completely different. And to understand that, we have to start with the numbers as they stand today, the raw totals. On paper, LeBron sits on top by a mile, a record built on 2 decades of dominance, consistency, and adaptability. But those totals don't tell the full story, because not all 42,000 points are created equal. Back in Wilt's day, teams averaged over 130 possessions per game, the fastest pace in league history. By the 2000s, during Kobe's prime, that number had dropped below 90. Today, we're back near 100 possessions, but the game is more efficient than ever. In the 70s and 80s, spacing didn't exist. Defenders could hand-check, camp in the paint, and basically knock you down without fear of a whistle. Now, you breathe on a shooter, and it's a foul, and the stats prove it. In the 1970s, league-wide offensive ratings hovered around 100 points per 100 possessions. By the 1990s, that number climbed to about 107. Today, it's a record-breaking 114, the most efficient era ever. So when people say LeBron passed Kareem, what they're really seeing is the result of different tempos, different rules, and completely different levels of defensive freedom. That's why, to make this fair, we're not just removing the threes, we're adjusting for pace, efficiency, and physicality. Once we do that, LeBron's record-breaking gap starts to shrink. And the all-time scoring list, the one that's been locked in for decades, suddenly looks a whole lot closer. Now, before we reveal the final leaderboard, let me quickly show you how these adjustments were actually calculated, because I want this experiment to be transparent, repeatable, and free of any bias. Everything you're about to see is based on public league-wide data taken straight from Basketball Reference. And the model uses only 3 measurable factors that objectively affect scoring across eras. Number 1, pace. How many possessions teams played per game? Wilt's era played over 120 possessions a game. Jordan's era played around 95. The early 2000s slowed down to under 90. And today's NBA sits around 100. More possessions equals more scoring opportunities. So we normalized every player to a neutral pace of 100 possessions per game using this formula. You take a player's scoring average and multiply it by 100 divided by the pace of their era. That's it. If your era was faster, your scoring gets scaled down a little. If your era was slower, your scoring gets bumped up. Nothing complicated, just correcting for opportunity. 2, efficiency. How easy or hard it was to score in a given era. We used league-wide offensive rating, points per 100 possessions. For example, the 60s had an offensive rating near 100. The 90s were around 107. Today's NBA is 114, the most efficient era ever. To normalize this, we scaled everyone to a neutral offensive rating of 110 using 110 divided by the offensive rating of their era. If your era was less efficient, you get a slight bump. If it was more efficient, you get scaled down. It's a simple way of saying, how impressive was your scoring compared to the environment around you? 3, physicality, the level of contact allowed on defense. This is the only semi-subjective part of the model, but it's still grounded in measurable era differences like hand-checking illegal defense rules, defensive 3 seconds, free throw rates, personal fouls per game. Older eras allowed hand-checking, forearm guarding, grabbing, bumping, and far less freedom of movement. Scoring inside the arc was simply harder, especially with how strictly offensive fouls were enforced back then.
That's Alcindor against Bellamy. No basket, says Ricky Powell.
So to reflect that increased difficulty, we apply a small physicality multiplier. Players from the 1960s, easily the most physical era in NBA history, get a 1.10 multiplier. Players from the 1970s through the 1990s, when hand-checking and forearm defense were still legal, get a 1.08. The 2000s, which were still physical, but more controlled, get a 1.04. And today's modern era, with freedom of movement rules and far less contact, stays at 1.00, completely neutral. These multipliers aren't meant to be perfect, just a fair acknowledgement of how different the defensive rules really were. Players from the most physical eras get a slight bump, and modern players stay neutral. Finally, once we calculated the adjusted points per game, we multiplied that by each player's career games played to get their era-adjusted career total. So the entire model works like this. We start with a player's raw points per game, then we adjust it for pace, so everyone plays the same number of possessions. Next, we adjust for efficiency, bringing every era into the same scoring environment. After that, we apply a small physicality multiplier to reflect the defensive rules each era allowed, and the number you get at the end becomes the player's final adjusted career total. No cherry picking, no invented stats. Every input comes from publicly available league averages, and the same formula was applied to every player. And now that everyone is on equal footing, let's find out who the real scoring king is. First, let's look at the list before any adjustments, the official record books. At the top of the all-time scoring list is LeBron James, with 42,184 points, the ultimate symbol of longevity. In second place is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the longtime record holder, with 38,387. Third is Karl Malone, quietly putting up 36,928 across nearly 2 decades of elite consistency. In fourth, Kobe Bryant with 33,643, one of the most skilled scorers the game has ever seen. Fifth is Michael Jordan at 32,292, despite playing fewer games than anyone else near the top. And rounding out the group is Wilt Chamberlain, in sixth place with 31,419, the man whose scoring feats still feel mythical even today. That's the hierarchy we've known for years. But what happens when we strip away the modern advantages? Remove the threes, adjust for pace, and equalize every era. Suddenly, that list starts to shift. After all the adjustments, pace, efficiency, physicality, and now removing the three-pointer, from everyone's game. Here's what the scoring leaderboard really looks like. At number 1, Michael Jordan, landing at roughly 36,900 adjusted career points. The hand check era didn't slow him down, it sharpened him. When you correct for pace, scoring environment, physicality, and even take away his threes, his scoring still borders on mythical. In second place, Karl Malone, with about 36,700 adjusted points. Nearly 2 decades of durability, almost 0 threes, and relentless mid-range punishment. Even after removing the little 3-point bonus he had, Malone barely budges. He's still right on Jordan's heels. Third is Wilt Chamberlain, with roughly 34,000 adjusted points. His raw totals were inflated by a lightning-fast pace, but even after correcting for that, his numbers still look like they came out of a video game. In fourth, LeBron James, settling around 33,000 adjusted points once his three-pointers are removed, and his era is normalized. His longevity keeps him firmly in the conversation. But without the modern spacing, pace, and three-point boost, his scoring output falls back toward the pack. Fifth is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, finishing with roughly 32,500 adjusted points. Still timeless, still efficient. The skyhook remains one of basketball's greatest cheat codes, a move no one has ever replicated, and a weapon that kept him dominant for 2 full decades. And in sixth place, Kobe Bryant, dropping to around 31,200 adjusted points once his three-pointers are removed. He loses the most on paper, but remember, he played in one of the slowest, most defensive eras of modern basketball. Even with the adjustment, his scoring resume remains one of the toughest, most self-made in NBA history. And suddenly, the title of scoring king looks very different. Once the threes are gone for everyone, the top of the mountain belongs to Jordan and Malone, with Wilt not far behind, and LeBron no longer separating himself from the pack. When you remove the modern advantages, the spacing, the pace, the offense-friendly rules, the story changes. The greatest scorers weren't always the ones who scored the most. And the all-time scoring king, well, that title starts to look a lot less certain. Because after all the adjustments, LeBron's lead is gone. And Michael Jordan? He's right back on top, where many still believe he belongs. We've seen what happens when we remove the three-pointer. But what if we flipped it? What if the legends who came before LeBron actually had the three-point line and used it like today's stars do? To find out, we're running one last experiment. And to be clear, this one is simple. We're not adjusting for pace, physicality, or era efficiency. We're just adding a modest amount of modern three-point shooting. About 3 attempts per game, using each player's real career three-point percentage, multiplied over the number of games they played. No fantasy numbers, no Curry range, just a realistic version of what if these guys took a few threes a night. And even with that small change, the ripple effect is huge, because an extra 1 or 2 made threes per game adds thousands of points over a full career. So what happens? Michael Jordan climbs over 33,000 career points in just 1,072 games, and when you include the playoffs, he's probably neck and neck with LeBron again. Kobe pushes past 35,000 right back into striking distance of Kareem. Karl Malone edges toward 37,000, proving how much his inside game already carried him. Wilt, a man who never even saw a three-point arc, still ends up over 32,000. And Kareem, even without a perimeter game, crosses 38,000 again. Suddenly, the gap between eras doesn't just close, it flips. If these legends had grown up in the modern era, with shooting coaches, spacing, and a green light from deep, LeBron might not be standing alone at the top. In fact, he might be chased. So after all of this, removing threes, adding threes, slowing the game down, speeding it up, and leveling every era, what does it actually tell us? Simple. Greatness lives in context. LeBron James is still one of the greatest players to ever touch a basketball. Not because of how many points he scored, but because of how long he stayed at the top. The league changed again and again, and LeBron adapted every single time. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar dominated without the three-point line. His skyhook survived rule changes, coaching changes, and 20 years of defenders who still couldn't stop it. Michael Jordan put up the most efficient scoring numbers we've ever seen, all while getting hand-checked, hammered on drives, and punished for every mid-air decision. Kobe Bryant thrived in the slowest era of modern basketball, where spacing was tight, defenses were brutal, and every possession was a battle of patience and skill. Karl Malone quietly built a scoring resume that would stand the test of any era. Wilt Chamberlain broke the sport in ways we still don't fully understand, playing in an era that barely resembles today's game, and still leaving numbers no one has touched. And that's the point. The more you adjust the eras, the more you change the rules, the more you tweak the math. The clearer it becomes, it's not about who scored the most points. It's about how they scored them, and when, and against whom, and under what conditions. LeBron's record tells one story. Jordan's efficiency tells another. Kareem's longevity tells its own. Kobe's shot-making speaks for itself. Wilt's dominance rewrote everything. They weren't great because of their era. They were great because they defined their era. And that's why the GOAT debate will never end. Because greatness isn't a number, it's a narrative, a legacy shaped by rules, style, pace, evolution, and most of all, by the players who forced the game to change. So whether you believe the real scoring king is LeBron, Jordan, Kareem, Kobe, Malone, or Wilt, the truth is that basketball's greatest players don't just play the game. They rewrite it, and that's something no era adjustment can ever take away.